So the symbol of the pressing stones is from Sri Aurobindo's The Secret of the Veda. So this is a 6,000-year-old symbol. And the pressing stones symbolize the forces that press on us, the difficulties we are given in our lifetime to guide us again and again on the path of purification of our energies and our unconscious formations. The stones press our obscurities through the sieve, like the cosmic strainer, and out comes the wine or the honey of delight. That's the journey from darkness to light. So when I decided to write, it happened in 2003 when this country decided to go to war. And I was quite horrified to watch so many Americans wave their flags for this country's glorious superiority. And I was horrified. You don't know. You don't know what it's like to have war on your soil. You don't have the experience in your bones. You don't know. This country goes out in the world and makes war everywhere. Anyway. So that's when I realized I had to write my story, because I want to share with you what it's like to have that kind of trauma in your childhood. So since I'm not a writer, I mean, I like to write and I write pretty well, but that's not my thing. I don't have to write. So I knew if I am going to write my story, I need to be part of groups so that every time we come together, I bring a chapter. And that's how for 20 years, I have actually complete writing my book. So I will start with a little bit of the preface. My father was Dutch, my mother German. Both were born and raised in Germany. Both were swept up by the ideological propaganda in pre-war Nazi Germany. My father became part of the German occupying forces in the Netherlands. In the post-war International Court in The Hague, after the war, he was sentenced to death for war crimes. But he was later released. The war and its aftermath destroyed my childhood. Healing from the impact of war and clearing my being from the massive shadow cast over my psyche by my father's past has been a major focus of my life. I love my father, and I am profoundly concerned about offending those whom he harmed and their surviving families. They would all be in the Netherlands at this point. I also do not wish to offend any of the millions of people whose loved ones were ruthlessly exterminated in the death camps of World War II. This is just my part of that dark time. And it's different, but it's also painful. So, my father's shadow. It is 1948. I am 6 years old. My older brother, Reinier, and I stand in front of the Catholic boarding school in Acht, a hamlet near Eindhoven in the south of Holland, saying goodbye to our mother who was visiting. She always looked so beautiful with her big brown eyes and her dark brown hair softly waving around her face. This day she's wearing a light blue wool coat trimmed with white fur. She looks to us with a troubled look and cups her hand under my chin and tilts my little face up to her, her dark eyes looking very seriously into mine. Reinier is standing close behind me. Her voice drops as she says, I have to tell you something very difficult. Your father has been sentenced to death. I believe he is innocent. The only thing you can do for him is pray. And she pauses and then adds, you can never talk to anyone about this. The moment my mother said that, I realized, young as I was, that the Dutch people, my country, had decided to kill my father. I stood there shattered. I understood that I had to keep this terrible knowledge a secret. If I had been lonely before, my isolation was now sealed like a tomb. I watched my mother, looking quite forlorn, walk back to the bus stop. My brother and I turned to climb the stairs into the gaping darkness of the school entrance. I turned to God with a vengeance. He could not let this happen. I realized I had a job to do and began to storm the heavens, where in some vast distance there was this vague, all-powerful being who loved us, whom no one had ever seen. Day and night, in bed, in the classroom, at the table, on the playground, or in the chapel, I prayed desperately to God, with all the passion in my little heart, to save my father's life. I prayed and begged, never sure if he would hear me. I became a deeply religious child with a dark secret. I could not then imagine how the shadow of my father's past would hang over me for the rest of my life. So about a half a year before the end of the war, this is September 1944, my father at that time had become a member of the SS, so he had intelligence. And he came home and told my mother that the Dutch were planning a major uproar the next day against the collaborators. Now, since my father, he came from Germany as a part of the occupation, but he was also Dutch. He's not only the enemy, he's also a traitor. And we have to leave. My mother and father have now three little children, have a baby sister. And we have to flee Holland by train in the night into Germany. This is like the opposite of what most people in that terrible situation had to do. We had to flee into Germany, and we came to Berlin. About a month or so before the actual end of the war, my father was sent back with a group of SS ruffians to go back into Holland and to undermine the Dutch resistance. That was their mission. My mother decides, with three little children, to go back with my father into war zone, which has been has been difficult for me to grok. But she was depending on my father, even though my father then brought her to some home in the north of Holland and dropped us off, and so he could go and do his thing. Well, by that time, it was just a few weeks before the end of the war, and all the collaborators in the area were frantically seeking for safety in numbers. So there was a large group of them that got together in some estate that they had access to. I don't know how that happened. But the war ends, and we are now immediately, the farmers and the farmhands from the area, who are all, of course, furious with anything to do with Germany, because they've just been through the hunger winter. It's been a nightmare. They came and they took us all prisoner. So we were a makeshift post-war prison camp that the government didn't even know about. It just happened because they were so mad. And there was very little food, no medical care. My baby sister was very ill. So she actually dies. And the women around my mother, I mean, people just didn't know anything about children. The women around my mother suggested that she does not tell this to us, to my brother and me, because we would be traumatized. And since we are so young, we will soon forget we ever had a little sister. So this is the next morning. My first memory. The women are standing very still in a dusty courtyard. I am barely 3, and I'm standing next to my older brother, who is standing next to my mom. We are not touching one another. Everyone is facing toward a loud, disembodied, angry male voice, shouting something from somewhere way in front of the crowd. All I see are the dingy skirts and brown stockinged legs of the women in front of me. After every shout, one of the women responds. Fear is thick in the air. Something is terribly wrong, and I know in my gut that it has to do with us. I freeze in terror. Any moment now, and they'll find out. I don't even know what, but I know there's something wrong with us. Then it's our turn. He calls. Silence. For an instant, the world is suspended and life seems to hang in the balance. Then a woman in the crowd says something, I don't know what, and inexplicably the moment passes. Nothing happens. We all go back inside, and my memory fades into the dark. No one ever knew how terrified I was. I believe this moment froze itself into my psyche. Some unspeakable terror is waiting to happen. I am at the mercy of it and do not have any recourse. Then, strange oblivion. My mother and everyone around me goes about their business as if nothing had happened. Sometime in my 50s, during one of my infrequent visits back to Holland, I finally shared this memory with my brother, which had played itself out in my mind so many countless times during my life, always equally terrifying, never understanding it. Oh yes, he knew right away. That was the morning after Almut died. It was roll call. They hadn't yet removed her number from the list. Mom was grief-stricken and could not speak when Almut's number was called. After a moment of silence, one of the women spoke up and explained. What strikes me now is how long it took for me to even talk about it to my brother. I never asked my mother. Our past was cloaked in her silence. Much later, I realized that I internalized the idea that she did not know what was going on with me and that maybe she did not care. I know today that I was wrong. So this is like and then comes boarding schools. Well, talk about trauma. Catholic, nuns, boarding schools. And they knew what was happening. We were there, both my brother and I were taken there. And they knew what was happening, why we were there, because of my father. And the court case surely was in all the newspapers, so they knew exactly. So in their eyes, I was the daughter of scum. And that is how I was treated. I knew they hated me. I didn't know why. I thought there must be something evil about me. Right, you try to understand. It was weird. And then we had to be quiet and stand still and obey and all of that shit. Sorry. Oh, then the miracle happens. My father comes home. We actually get a home, and my father is released from prison. They organized a psychiatric re-evaluation of him to see if he had actually been able to be responsible for his actions, and it was determined he had not been. So after 10 years in prison, he was released with the condition that he would live in a psychiatric hospital under psychiatric care. He was free to come and go for a year, and then he could come home. So I am finally coming home, and I'm 12, and so my mother and I have a sweet little time together. And then my father comes home, and we get an apartment. It's somehow family arranges for us to have a place to live. Now here's my father. So I come from boarding school. I feel like I am nothing. I have no sense of self. I don't know who I am. I'm just kind of at the mercy of my environment, wherever I happen to be. Now my father comes home, and boy, does he love me. So here's this man who has, created the great disaster in our life. He comes home and he is big, warm, funny, bright, very smart, very spiritual. And he starts to talk to me. After dinner is his time to sit with me, and he talks to me. Now I am wrapped up in him because it's the first time that a human being has taken the trouble to talk with me, I thought. Later I realized he was talking at me. And his favorite topics were spirituality and sexuality, and they were beautifully mixed and blended. When I was 13, I knew nothing. I did not know where babies came from. When I was 14, I knew everything there was to know under the sun of every sexual kink there was in the world, especially sadomasochism. That was his favorite. So there was never one moment where I was given the information that I had agency to decide what was right for me. I was trained to become like a mother whore, like you understand your husband, all his needs, so he doesn't have to go to prostitutes to get his needs met. That was my father's crazy idea. I called it later psychic incest. I mean, he was always proper physically. There was nothing. He didn't know boundaries. People didn't know boundaries, about boundaries. That is like, because psychology comes into our awareness much later. So, all I want is get married. Because I believe these fairy tales, like once you get married, then all your problems are over, right? There's all these difficulties and you fall in love, and then when you finally get married to the right man, then your problems are over. Well, little did I know that that's when they begin. So I'm 21 and get married, and it's a disaster. After a few years, I decided to study psychology. And at that time, there's a magazine that comes out in Holland with an article about Oroville. So you see the beautiful picture there that's called the Matrimondier, that golden structure. It is the center of Oroville, the city of dawn. So I love that picture because it's a picture of the dawn. So I'm separated from my husband, and I have a relationship with a woman, and then I fall in love with a young man, and we both of us sign up for clinical psychology, and we are put on a year waiting list. So all of a sudden, he and I, he's a sweetheart, I love him. We have a year time. We are able to make money. We have, under the table. And he wants to go to India. And I'm going, and I couldn't see any rationality not to do that. It's an amazing adventure. But I didn't want to go. And then one day I looked inside of myself and I said, so why would you not go? And I realized I was afraid. And I had myself a good cry and said, you're going. I cannot be run by fear. So we hitchhike the hippie trail from Amsterdam through Istanbul and the Middle East to India and down to Pondicherry, where is the Sri Aurobindo ashram. And the mother is there still. She is 94 by that time. So we arrive in Pondicherry on February 12th, 1972. It turned out we had arrived just days before Mother's 94th birthday. 1972 was also Sri Aurobindo, so this is the mother. So she is the one I will actually meet, which changed my life. It was also Sri Aurobindo's centenary year, 1972. There was a huge celebration, and Pondicherry was buzzing with thousands of visitors. On Mother's birthday, February 21st, she would appear on her balcony to give darshan to the crowd. So darshan is when the guru or the teacher appears to you or to the public. That's called darshan. So, let's see. We befriend Ron. He is an American who kindly took me under his wings. He seemed to sense that I was meant to be there. When he heard that we were only going to stay until after Mother's birthday, he told us that we could write to Mother and ask to see her in person. And Mother would always try to see visitors, knowing that they might never have the opportunity to meet with her again. And that was granted. Ron impressed upon me to make sure to look into her eyes. Many Indian devotees, he explained, would simply prostrate before her and never look at her. He really didn't want me to miss out on that most important opportunity of looking into her eyes. He also told us that people usually bring Mother flowers. My no-nonsense attitude immediately rebelled. I don't know her. I'm not going to bring her any flowers. It's like, what? I don't want any nonsense. It's like, after having left the Catholic Church, no more hoopla. That was my attitude. So, on Sunday morning, February 27, 1972, Rudy and I put on our best clothes and I headed for the ashram. Just as we were leaving the guest house, the manager came out. Seeing us all dressed up, he smiled and greeted us in his wonderful Indian accent. "Good morning, where are you going?" "We are going to see Mother." "Oh, wait, he says, and he runs over to the wall and he picks us each a gigantic orange hibiscus with his crimson stem. "Here, take these to Mother." We accepted his gracious gesture and started off on our walk along the ocean side, each of us carrying our magnificent flower. I discovered later that the orange hibiscus is a symbol of Oroville. We joined a long line of people who were slowly winding their way through the courtyard, up the stairs, on landings, and up the stairs again, all the way to Mother's room on the 3rd floor. By the time we entered her room, it was close to noon. It being the end of February in South India, it's quite hot, and my beautiful hibiscus is sadly wilting. Due to her considerable age, Mother sat slightly bent, so to be able to look into her eyes, you really had to get down on your knees. When my turn came, I knelt in front of her and presented my poor hibiscus. In that instant, the hibiscus opened itself to her. Now I am mesmerized by what's happening with my flowers, like being on acid. This doesn't happen. It's like, ah! Suddenly, I remembered to look at her. I handed the flower to her assistant and looked into her eyes. She was so absolutely still. It seemed to me as if she were dwelling on the other side of the galaxy. Nothing happened. But I kept looking until I heard my own voice inside of me command, "Open up." In that instant, we recognized each other. "It's you," my whole being shouted, and she felt exactly the same. So here we are two, we are the same, and we know each other. And we are just ecstatic. In that moment, even as we were two, we were the same. We couldn't let go of gazing into one another's eyes. When I felt a nudge that it was time to move along, I slowly got up. Our eyes remained locked, our heads turning until the distance forced us to disengage. In a daze, I walked out of the room. Tears began to stream down my cheeks. I wept for 3 days. Wherever I went, bittersweet tears kept streaming down my face. Tears of unimaginable joy at having been seen, at finally being known to her and to myself, mixed with a grief that had taken so very, very long for this to happen. It was as if I had been waiting since the beginning of my countless lifetimes of searching for God. In front of her, in one fell swoop, all my veils were torn and my soul stood revealed. I had come home to myself. So 3 days later, we wake up in the morning and it's clear I'm back down to earth, and my boyfriend realized it too. He said, "So, you ready to go?" And I'm going, "I'm not going anywhere. I just got here." And that afternoon, I took him to the train station. He had had a very different experience to seeing Mother. He was 5 years younger than me, or 6 years younger than me, which in your 20s is a lot. She was only 23, and he wasn't ready to give up all his, whatever fun he wanted to have in his life. So then I live in the ashram for a few months, and then everybody had to ask Mother permission if you were allowed to go and live in Oroville, because she could see your soul. She knew who you were better than you did, and she would know whether that's where you belonged or not. So I asked her if I could go, and she said yes. So I moved to the center, where it was a workers' camp for people who were building the Macho Mandir. So I helped with the concreting too. But when I got there, it was a big, deep, huge hole in the ground, and pillars were built up to support the huge dome that was planned to be. So let's see, where do I go? Yeah, so now I don't have a boyfriend, and I realize all I want to be with the beloved. So I make, like many of us did, I made a vow of celibacy. I didn't want to have any more boyfriends, girlfriends, all that stuff, all that. Anyway, just give me God. um, and of course, then I get hit with my sex and love addiction. Now I say no. It's like, wait a minute. Oh, here's the alpha male in our group, and boy, is he gorgeous. And yeah, it was very, very painful. I ended up in the hospital because my stomach was so upset. I was so conflicted in myself about this because I didn't want it. I had made a choice in my soul to belong only to the divine. And here, I'm fucking my brains out. This gorgeous man. And I am very, very conflicted, and I end up with such a stomach ache that I'm taken to the hospital. Anyway, then I left the center because I couldn't be around him, and I was invited to come and live in Kotakarai. Kotakarai was a small settlement of Orovillians next to the village of Kotakarai. And I really loved the villagers. When I left India, I missed them. I didn't miss the Orovillians, but I missed the Indians. So let's see. And then, of course, after half a year of following my commitment, I fell in love with Daniel. And within a month, I was pregnant with my first child. It was like, and he was such a fine man. Everybody loved Daniel. He spoke fluent Tamil, like none of us could. I could speak just little bits, I could never make one complete sentence. It's like pebbles over water. So anyway, I'm getting pregnant, we have a baby, lots of things happen, and I have another child, 2 daughters. And I'm not going to go into all my experiences in Oroville. There were many, and some of them very painful, and many beautiful. We get a letter from Daniel's parents saying, "You have our only grandchildren. Your mother is not well enough to travel. We haven't seen you to Daniel in 10 years. We're sending the whole family tickets to come to California for 4 months." What do? You say yes. There was only one right answer. We were determined to go back, but that didn't happen. So when we decided that we were going to stay, the reason why is all in here. We found a farmhouse on Ocean Street Extension in Santa Cruz, and we loved Santa Cruz. People were relaxed, there were lots of hippies around, we felt totally at home. What I particularly loved was to see my daughters run around in we had 3 acres. Daniel grew a big garden, and the girls were just able to run around and play, and there were chickens and goats, and avocado trees I could climb in, all of that. And I saw that and I saw their freedom. And I realized how little they were. That was my age, that I was already put away in boarding school, where I just had to behave myself all the time. And it was marvelous. It was just marvelous. So lots of things happen. Daniel and I both find somebody else to be with. I start a relationship with a woman, which is the first time in my life that there's somebody who actually wants to hear the stories of my childhood. So that is where my childhood healing starts, with her. I rage and I cry, and she wants me to listen. She said, "No, don't stop. No, don't put it under the table. I want to hear." It was really remarkable. So it was a safe space for me. So things happen. I leave her, marry another crazy guy. And then I'm going to jump way ahead to when I meet my shaman, because that's an important part of my story. His name was Hara Ra. He chose that name when he felt he was initiated. The Hara, meaning the belly, the chakra, the belly, and Ra is a sun god. So it's the sun in the belly, that was him. He set for psychedelic session work, and he wanted me to join him in that. And I was very excited. I had a healing practice already for quite some time and loved to do that work. And now I knew I could help people to bypass this whole conscious mind noise that keeps us from getting in touch with what's actually going on deep within us. So I was excited. And then he said, well, the only way that you can do this, if you need to have the experience of having a psychedelics therapy session. And he would sit for me. So that's what we did. And it was really beautiful. And then all of a sudden, a few hours in the session, I became aware that Harara has been pacing the floor. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and declared, "There is a secret." "Oh no," I groaned. "That! Not that." I knew there is only one big, ugly secret. It is clear to me that I am at a point of no return and agree to take the plunge into the abyss of my subconscious. It seems I drop out of time and space. Everything becomes profoundly still. Slowly, my right shoulder lifts off the bed, as if moved by some involuntary force. Something is hidden behind my back. As my upper body lifts, I look behind me and gasp. I see a mass grave with white corpses, the Holocaust. My terrifying guilt exposed. I reel with the impact. Harara is right there, unflappable, just present, strong, kind, and exceedingly skillful. In his gaze, I understand the error of my child's mind. I hadn't been able to differentiate myself from my father, nor could I differentiate his war crimes from the mass murder of 6 million Jews. In my confusion, subconsciously, I instantly felt guilty by association. So I call this the turning point. Because what I realize now is how dissociated I am. I have been really dissociated from my emotional self my whole life. When I'm upset, when there's something, I just get grumpy, upset. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's hurting, why I feel the way I do, or what to do with it. And I have no idea, zero, that I could ever ask for help, because that was not available. Then we go to 2003. So because of this dissociation, I found out that if I took a toke of marijuana, all of a sudden, first of all, I would just relax. And I felt like all that I lived with this internal pressure all the time. And I take a toke, and then I realized why I'm upset. Oh, he said that. Oh, I'm feeling that. Oh, this is my little girl feeling such and such. I wrote notebooks upon notebooks of what I thought was my inner child work. What I didn't know is that as long as you are altered, you are not changing. As long as you are altered, no matter how much work you do, you cannot change. You get into the drama, and the drama gets bigger and bigger. I became so unhappy. I was depressed. I was in pain all the time. I spent thousands of dollars on healers and acupuncturists and you name it. And I became more and more miserable, and I could not stop. When I realized that it was too late, I could not stop. I had to smoke first thing in the morning. I had to smoke. It was burning my throat, even though I had a little water pipe. It was burning my throat. Tears would run down my face, and I could not do it. I had become a full-blown addict. I didn't believe marijuana was addictive. I thought it was propaganda from the government, that marijuana was, there was anything wrong with it. This is a gift of the mother. I feel so happy. I love the music. I love nature. I sit in my garden with my roses. I feel like I belong in life. That was the beauty that I received from marijuana until I couldn't stop and I got more and more depressed. So I end up in the emergency room. And my brilliant idea to stop my suffering was to take a high dose of acid, because I knew my problem was in my mind. If I only take a high enough dose, then that will change and maybe I will come out of my suffering. Well, I became completely psychotic. And my daughter got me in the middle of the night to the emergency room. And from there, I went to 3 days into the mental health unit, and from there to rehab. So I did the whole 28 days of rehab at Janice. It was amazing. It was truly, I had no idea. Here I am amongst the drunks and the addicts of Santa Cruz, and I feel safe. I feel that I belong because they're suffering just like me. And we're all at the bottom of the barrel. We're all there because we have no more answers left. I knew I had no more answers left. I didn't know what the fuck to do with myself after all that. And so I was there. And these people had a solution. They did. And I was like, that's what I need. Give me a solution. Tell me what to do. And so on the last day of my stay there, I knew the next day I was going to go back home, and I was terrified because I was afraid. I knew what the addiction, what a hold it had had on me. And my counselor spots me, and she calls me in, and I tell her how scared I am, and she knows I'm future tripping. And she says, why don't you become really still, become totally in the moment, and so that you are in the present. That's what she suggested, and this is what happened. That evening, in the midst of everyone milling around, I sat down with my notebook and talked myself into silence. This is what I wrote. Remember, this moment is the gift, right here, right now. Remember, you are a child of the mother, and she provides. Then I remembered what Mother had told us, and I wrote, this is what she told me. Be simple, be happy, do the best you can, and leave the rest to the divine. Let go and breathe. Trust the wisdom that surrounds you. You only need to show up today, right here, right now. this breath. Trust, relax, surrender. In the silence that followed, I heard a clear voice behind me to my left. I am here. It was life-changing. I was ready for my graduation the next morning and my return home. So fantastic doing the 12 steps. I had no idea that I would learn how to do this crazy surrender thing. How do you surrender your ego? Does anybody know how you surrender your ego? I had no idea. I wanted it. All I wanted was to be one with the divine. So about 9 years into my recovery, I realized I want to do the steps on a much deeper level, and I find my way into ACA. So ACA is the Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. Now, I didn't even have a family, but I had a dysfunctional childhood. And I go to a workshop, and this woman says, we were taught not to feel, not to trust, not to speak. So I take myself to an ACA meeting. The one that I really love is called The Barn. It's a Saturday morning, 9 o'clock ACA meeting. And I've actually gone back there now. And that is where, for the first time, I felt that I had done a lot of inner child healing work already, but I wasn't changing. So when I came into ACA, I come in this meeting and I sit down, and somehow, not of my doing, but somehow my child self distinguishes itself from me. I am not anymore this mixed bag of childhood and adult and spiritual and fucked up and all of that. All of a sudden, I'm sitting there and my little girl is standing next to me, leaning into my leg. And I see her looking around the room at all these quiet people sitting there, everybody willing to do the hard work of dealing with their own childhood trauma. And I hear her say, I am home. A few weeks later, she actually crawled on my lap. And I thought, okay, she's beginning to trust me, right? Because if you abandon your child self, which we do, because we don't know what to do with her, then she still feels abandoned, right? So all of a sudden, and then she doesn't trust us either. So she's sitting on my lap, and the next time she puts her little arm around my neck, and I'm going, oh, we're good. So I am going to read a poem that I wrote that came out of my work at ACA. It's called Doorstep Delivery. It's inspired by a poem of the same title by Greg Hall. What was left on my doorstep like an abandoned orphan? Will someone please take care of her, claim her, and take her home? But no, years later, she was still there, shivering in the cold, silent and beyond hunger, her big eyes looking at me darkly. Would I ever pick her up and take her in? When finally it became clear to me that no one else would claim her, now in a state of near despair myself, I picked her up and brought her in. I had to make up for decades of neglect. I washed and dressed her, combed her hair. I nursed and rocked and soothed her to sleep. I cooed over her and named her. Slowly she softened and began to trust. Over time she told me everything. She learned to cry and rage. I held her while she sobbed and screamed. Together we shook our fists and stomped our feet at the injustice of it all. Now, she is my sweet and sparkling, happy and funny little girl. Hand in hand we walk through life, sometimes skipping, sometimes stalling, finding our way into love. Now, I think think first, before we run out of time, I want to thank people who have helped me. So the first person was my teacher at Cabrillo, Kathy Cohen. She was also my first editor. She did the first part of the editing. And then there is Carolyn. So many of us have been with Carolyn, who is a remarkable writer herself and knows how to lead writing groups for women. And that is where I really started to write. So she witnessed the beginning of my journey. And then when you had to have a little break, the group that I happen to be in is now still my group, 14 years later, I think. We call ourselves the Seven Sisters, the Pleiades, the stars. There is Nora and Diana and Marilyn and Urmila and Alexandra. And Lauren, there you are. Sorry, you're so... So we have, because I was with them for 20 years, for 14 years, but I was in groups for 20 years. That is how I actually got my book written, because I don't have to write. I always find other things to do. But when I have to come to my meeting, then I have to bring something. So then I write a chapter, and that's how 20 years later my book actually was done. So I want to thank you all so much. And Joanna and Bill for helping me sell books, and all of you bringing goodies, and my daughter taking care of lots of things. So if there are any questions, this would be a good time. Yeah, I suffered from, in psychology, they call it cognitive dissonance. You cannot integrate the love for this person with the crimes he had committed. It is inconceivable. And he was seduced, like young people get seduced by the glory of the nation. We see it here in this country. Oh, America is the greatest. Let's go bomb somebody. And people fall for it. They are seduced, people, especially young people, but millions of people in Germany and in the rest of Europe were seduced by the propaganda of the idealism of National Socialism, of the Nazis. And then they went into war and all hell broke loose. Then it was too late. He could not. When he was in hell, in those last weeks of the war, he realized what a terrible situation he found himself in, and how contrary that was to what he had hoped for himself. He had wanted to lead a good and a spiritual life, and here he was being a monster. He had to. In the circumstances, when people are in war, their life is always in danger. My father thought that my mother and the children had already been killed by the Dutch. He was crazy. There was no communication. He didn't know. He was not in his right mind. But yes, he had been seduced. My mother was seduced too. My whole family in Germany, I had two uncles. So my father and his two brothers, they were all part of the system. One was a doctor, so he was a military doctor, and the other was a Navy general, but something high up in the Norwegian waters. And they just went home after the war, and nothing happened. But my father was in Holland, and he was caught, and he brought shame over the whole family. And people could not, his siblings were asked to testify about him. And they all were so puzzled that he had been able to do these terrible things because they knew him as a sweet young man. That's how they knew him. They couldn't really believe that he had become that. Perfectly fine people can become war criminals. And if you are on the winning side, you become a hero. If you're on the losing side, you are a war criminal. In the end, after a long time after he left his body, a psychic woman in Holland channeled him, and he wrote a letter to me, which is in here, where he acknowledges the impossibility of what he inflicted on me and on his loved ones. And he wants to speak to people to beware of great authoritarian figures that will make your country great again. Untimely Books has been amazing for me. It's a fairly new, I am their 5th book that they're publishing. We had been reading, so Marco is the organizer of this whole co-op system. Marco had been part of a small group with me online since 2019, reading Savitri. So Savitri is Sri Aurobindo's epic poem, where he actually transmits consciousness to the reader. If you read it out loud, then it resonates all in your body too. So he had listened to me reading Sri Aurobindo. And when we were done, he had just decided to start a publishing co-op. And he said, "Can I publish your book?" It's like I heard about how difficult it is to find a publisher, and I'd gone to a few little workshops, and I thought, I'm writing now. I do one thing at a time, if I can. Actually, I do. So I'm writing, and all of a sudden, I'm approaching the end of my book, and here I have an editor, and his wife did the layout and the fonts and everything. So this couple has totally dedicated itself to make this beautiful book. So then they're in Colorado. Marco invites me to come to Colorado because he has access to a professional sound studio, the Longmont Media Public, whatever. So I said, yes, I'm coming to read my book because he knows my voice and he knows how I read. And so I go there for 3 weeks and we recorded the entire book. So in the audio, you also hear my mother playing the piano. My mother was a fine pianist, and I'm so pleased that something of hers is in my book because I'm so focused on my father. I mean, he was the big the big to-do in my life. But so that has her music in between the sections. There are 7 sections in the book. The war, adolescence, India, psychedelics, healing. There are 7 sections in total. So in between each section, you hear her play Chopin and Prokofiev. So that's really quite wonderful. And in the printed book, of course, there are lots of pictures, which you don't have in the audio. So. Thank you. It makes me think of my audio editor, whom I met in Longmont, Colorado. So he has edited my entire audio file, which is I had no idea how much work that would be. And he said to me, I am changing, and the people around me are changing. It was the greatest thing that could be given to me as a result of reading about my life. In the beginning, there's a page in the front that says, "Dear reader, I offer my life to you. May you be inspired to find and follow your own truth and pursue your healing one step at a time in your own unique way as you feel yourself to be guided. There's no one path. There's each of our true paths.